Yo, bout girl, think you can handle a real fighter's ring? Or is that broom your only move? Brad Callahan's scornful challenge rang out in the Atlanta dojo, his voice thick with contempt as he sneered at Aisha Carter, the young black janitor mopping silently after hours. The tension crackled, his words steeped in prejudice, oblivious to the fire he was igniting. Aisha's radiant brown skin and flowing, wavy black hair glowed under the harsh lights, her poised silence masking a history that would soon upend everything. This tale isn't just about a spar, it's about hidden power and a humbling lesson that left an arrogant bully stunned. Stay with us to witness how one moment turned a dojo's world inside out. Subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Join the ride. The Atlanta dojo lay cloaked in the hush of a late Thursday evening, its air heavy with the lingering scent of sweat and liniment. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting stark shadows across the polished wooden floor, where Aisha Carter, a 28-year-old black woman, moved with quiet purpose. Her radiant brown skin glowed under the harsh glow, and her long, wavy black hair swayed gently, tied loosely to keep it from her face as she pushed a mop across the tatami. She was a vision of grace in her simple janitor's uniform, navy pants and a faded gray shirt. Yet her presence seemed to fade into the background, unnoticed by the world. 2 months into her job at Elite Strike Muay Thai Academy, Aisha had mastered the art of invisibility, arriving after classes ended, when the students' laughter and the thuds of their strikes had long faded. Tonight, though, the rhythm of her routine was disrupted. The advanced Muay Thai class had stretched beyond its usual hours, and the dojo still hummed with the energy of 5 lingering students, their wraps stained with effort, their breaths heavy from sparring. At the center of it all stood Brad "Thunder" Callahan, a 35-year-old white man whose broad shoulders and chiseled arms spoke of years spent dominating the ring. His blonde hair was cropped close, and his blue eyes gleamed with a smug confidence that bordered on cruelty. Brad was the kind of man who wore his black belt like a crown, his authority unquestioned in this sacred space, or so he believed. Aisha kept her head down, her mop gliding in smooth, deliberate strokes. She had learned early on to avoid eye contact with men like Brad, whose egos seemed to demand constant validation. But tonight, his gaze locked onto her, a predator sensing an opportunity. The students, sprawled on benches or adjusting their gear, sensed a shift in the air, their chatter dying down as Brad's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Yo, janitor girl," he called, his tone dripping with disdain. "Think you can handle a real fighter's ring? Or is that broom your only move?" The words landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate, laced with a venom that made the room feel smaller. Aisha's hands tightened briefly on the mop handle, but she didn't pause. Her face remained impassive, her dark eyes focused on a stubborn scuff mark on the floor. She had heard worse, far worse, in her life, and she had learned to let such taunts slide off her like water. Brad smirked, emboldened by her silence. He stepped closer, his heavy boots thudding against the tatami, a deliberate invasion of her space. "Come on, sweetheart," he pressed, his voice louder now, performative for his audience. "This floor's seen real warriors. You think you belong here, scrubbing where champions train?" His words carried a thinly veiled prejudice, the kind that hid behind a smile but cut just as deep. The students shifted uncomfortably. A young woman, Lynn Nguyen, barely 20, with her hair pulled into a tight ponytail, glanced at her friend, a lanky teen named Marcus, who shook his head slightly, as if warning her to stay out of it. Aisha's mop slowed, but she didn't look up. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she said, her voice low and even, the kind of calm that could be mistaken for submission. But there was a steadiness in her tone, a quiet strength that made Brad's smirk falter for a split second. He recovered quickly, turning to his students with a theatrical laugh. "Hear that, folks? She's just doing her job. Bet she's never even thrown a punch in her life." The laughter that followed was forced, a nervous ripple from the students who didn't dare challenge their instructor. Lynn's jaw tightened, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her hand wraps. She opened her mouth to speak but caught herself, her eyes darting to Aisha, who seemed oblivious to the room's growing tension. But Aisha wasn't oblivious. Beneath her calm exterior, a familiar heat stirred in her chest, a memory of another time, another place, where jeers like Brad's had once pushed her to the edge. 7 years ago, Aisha Carter had been someone else entirely. Black Viper, a kickboxing prodigy whose name echoed through arenas across the country. Three-time national champion, undefeated, her speed and precision had left opponents reeling. But that life ended in a flash of tragedy. A sparring match gone wrong, a young fighter hospitalized, her career shattered not by defeat but by guilt. The crowd's racist taunts that night had fueled her aggression, and the aftermath had broken her. She had walked away from the ring, vowing never to return, choosing instead the anonymity of jobs like this one, where no one asked questions and no one expected greatness. Now, as Brad circled her like a shark, Aisha felt the past creeping back. Her muscles tensed instinctively, her body remembering the stance she had spent years perfecting. But she pushed it down, focusing on the mop, the floor, the rhythm of her work. She wasn't that person anymore. She couldn't be. Brad, sensing her refusal to engage, grew bolder. He stepped onto the tatami, his presence a deliberate challenge. "What's the matter, janitor girl? Scared to step on sacred ground?" He spread his arms, gesturing to the ring as if it were his kingdom. "This is where real fighters prove themselves. Not where, well, you know." The implication hung heavy, unspoken but clear. The room fell silent, the student's discomfort palpable. Marcus whispered something to Lynn, who shook her head, her eyes fixed on Aisha with a mix of concern and curiosity. Aisha paused, her mop still. She straightened slowly, her movements fluid, almost too graceful for someone who spent her nights cleaning. Her eyes met Brad's for the first time, and in that fleeting moment, something passed between them. A flicker of recognition in Brad's gaze, quickly masked by bravado. "I'm not here to fight," Aisha said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm here to clean. Let me do my work, and you can do yours." The words were polite, but they carried an edge, a quiet defiance that made Brad's smile tighten. He wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by someone he saw as beneath him. "Oh, we'll see about that," he muttered, his tone promising trouble. The students exchanged glances, sensing the storm brewing. Lynn's hand hovered over her phone, as if debating whether to record what might come next. Aisha, unaware of the eyes on her, resumed her work, but her heart pounded, the echo of a life she had buried threatening to rise. This was no ordinary night at the dojo. The air crackled with the weight of unspoken histories, and Aisha Carter, the silent janitor, stood at the center of a moment that would soon unravel everything Brad Callahan thought he knew. The Atlanta dojo's fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting a sterile glow over the polished tatami where Aisha Carter stood, mop still in hand, her radiant brown skin catching the light like polished bronze. Her long, wavy black hair swayed slightly as she resumed her work, ignoring the weight of Brad Callahan's mocking gaze. The air was thick with tension, the kind that hums before a storm breaks. Brad, the self-proclaimed king of this Muay Thai sanctuary, leaned against a heavy bag, his muscular frame taut with arrogance. His blue eyes glinted with the thrill of provocation, his blonde buzz cut glistening with sweat from the extended class. "Come on, janitor girl," he taunted, his voice a blade slicing through the quiet. "You gonna keep hiding behind that mop, or you gonna show us what you're made of?" Aisha's hands moved methodically, pushing the mop in smooth arcs, but her mind was elsewhere, pulled back to a life she had buried 7 years ago. She was 21 then, a rising star in the kickboxing world, known as Black Viper for her lightning-fast strikes and unyielding precision. The memory hit her like a jab to the chest. The roar of the crowd in a packed Chicago arena, the blinding lights, the sting of racist jeers. "Go back to where you came from," that fueled her fire. She had been unstoppable, a three-time national champion, her name whispered in awe. But that night during a charity exhibition match, everything changed. Her opponent, a young fighter named Maria Torres, had crumpled under Aisha's flurry of kicks, a miscalculated strike sending her to the hospital with a fractured skull. The crowd's cheers turned to gasps, and Aisha's world shattered. Though Maria recovered, the guilt and the venom of those jeers drove Aisha from the ring for good. She vowed never to fight again, choosing the shadows of jobs like this one, where no one knew her name. Now, as Brad's taunts echoed, that vow trembled. Her fingers tightened around the mop handle, her knuckles paling slightly. She could feel the eyes of the 5 students, Lin Nguyen, Marcus, and 3 others, watching from the edges of the dojo, their unease palpable. Lin, her ponytail swaying as she shifted nervously, clutched her water bottle, her gaze flickering between Aisha and Brad. The instructor's voice grew louder, more theatrical, as he sensed his audience's attention. "What's it gonna be, sweetheart?" he sneered, stepping closer, his boots scuffing the tatami. "You think you can just waltz in here, cleaning up after real fighters, and act like you belong? Step up or step out." Aisha's breath hitched, but her face remained a mask of calm. She straightened, setting the mop against a wall with deliberate care, her movements fluid, almost too precise for a janitor. The motion caught Brad off guard, his smirk faltering as he noticed the subtle grace in her posture. "I don't want trouble," she said, her voice low but steady, carrying a quiet authority that made the room feel smaller. "I'm here to do my job, not play games." Her dark eyes met his for a moment, and something in her gaze, a flicker of steel, made Brad's confidence waver, though he quickly masked it with a scoff. "Games?" Brad laughed, turning to his students for approval. "Hear that? She thinks this is a game. This is a dojo, lady, where warriors prove themselves. Not a place for—" He trailed off, his words heavy with unspoken prejudice, his lips curling into a cruel smile. The students shifted uncomfortably. Marcus whispered something to Lynn, who shook her head, her fingers tightening around her phone, as if debating whether to intervene. The air crackled with anticipation, the kind that precedes a moment no one can unsee. Aisha's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the stirrings of a fire she had long suppressed. She remembered the Chicago arena, the weight of the gloves, the rhythm of her feet on the mat. She remembered the taunts, "You don't belong here," and how she had turned them into fuel, her kicks slicing through the air like blades. But she also remembered Maria's lifeless body on the canvas, the ambulance sirens, the weight of guilt that followed. She had spent 7 years running from that moment, from the fighter she used to be. Yet here in this dojo, Brad's words were pulling her back, each insult a spark threatening to reignite a flame she had doused. Brad stepped closer, his broad frame looming over her. "Come on, janitor girl," he pressed, his voice dropping to a mocking whisper. "Show us what you've got. Or are you just going to stand there, pretending you're something you're not?" His hand reached out, as if to nudge her shoulder, a gesture meant to humiliate rather than harm. Isha's body reacted before her mind could stop it. She shifted her weight, her feet sliding into a subtle stance, her shoulders squaring instinctively. The movement was so fluid, so natural, that it seemed to defy her janitor's uniform. Brad's hand met empty air, and for a split second, his eyes widened, betraying a flicker of doubt. The students noticed. Lynn's breath caught, her eyes narrowing as she studied Aisha's posture. It wasn't the awkward shuffle of someone untrained. It was the stance of a predator, coiled and ready. Marcus leaned forward, his brow furrowing, sensing something extraordinary beneath Aisha's quiet exterior. The other students, 2 men and a woman in their 20s, exchanged glances, their earlier amusement fading into curiosity. The dojo, once a stage for Brad's dominance, now felt like a theater for something far greater. Aisha's voice broke the silence, calm but laced with an edge that cut through Brad's bravado. "If you want a show, you'll get one," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "But when we're done, you'll owe this dojo an apology for turning it into your personal circus." The words hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in quiet certainty. Brad's laugh was forced now, his confidence cracking like thin ice. He turned to his students, gesturing grandly. "You hear that? She thinks she's got something to prove. Let's see how long that lasts." But Aisha wasn't listening to him anymore. Her mind was elsewhere, back in the ring, where the crowd's jeers had once pushed her to greatness and to ruin. She had sworn never to let those taunts define her again. Yet as Brad's voice droned on, mocking her existence, she felt the stirrings of something dangerous. Not anger, but purpose. The Black Viper wasn't gone. She was merely sleeping, and Brad Callahan was about to learn what happens when you wake a sleeping serpent. The Atlanta dojo pulsed with an electric undercurrent, the kind that makes the air feel heavy and the heart race before a breaking point. Aisha Carter stood at the edge of the tatami, her mop resting against the wall, its handle a silent witness to the storm brewing. Her radiant brown skin seemed to absorb the fluorescent light, and her long, wavy black hair, now freed from its loose tie, cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face that held a quiet, unshakable resolve. Brad Callahan, the hulking Muay Thai instructor, loomed before her, his chiseled frame radiating arrogance. His blue eyes glinted with mockery, his blonde buzz cut catching the light as he paced the mat like a lion taunting its prey. The 5 students, Lynn Nguyen, Marcus, and 3 others, stood frozen, their eyes darting between the 2 figures, sensing a collision that could reshape the very air of the dojo. Brad's voice cut through the silence, sharp and venomous. "So, janitor girl, you think you can talk big?" he sneered, planting his fists on his hips. "Step onto this mat and show us you're more than a broom pusher, or get out of my dojo." His words dripped with contempt, each syllable a jab aimed at Aisha's dignity, laced with the kind of prejudice that didn't need to be named to be felt. The students shifted uneasily. Lynn, her ponytail swaying as she clutched her phone, took a half step forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Coach Brad, this isn't necessary. Can we just get back to training?" Her words were a plea, but they carried a spark of defiance that made Brad's jaw tighten. "Training?" Brad snapped, rounding on Lynn with a glare that pinned her in place. "You questioning me, Nguyen? Sit down and learn something, or you can find another gym." His tone was a whip, cracking through the room, and Lynn flinched, her eyes dropping to the floor. Marcus, beside her, clenched his fists, his dark eyes flashing with frustration, but he stayed silent, his loyalty to the dojo warring with his discomfort. The other students, a wiry man named Jake, a broad-shouldered woman called Tara, and a quiet teen named Sam, exchanged nervous glances, their earlier amusement replaced by a growing unease. Aisha hadn't moved, her posture still, almost too still, like the calm surface of a lake hiding a current below. Her dark eyes flicked to Lynn, registering the young woman's courage, and for a moment a memory stirred, a flash of her younger self standing up to jeers in a Chicago gym, her fists clenched not in anger, but in determination. She pushed the thought away, focusing on Brad, who was now circling her, his boots scuffing the tatami with deliberate insolence. "What's it gonna be, sweetheart?" he taunted, his voice louder now, playing to his audience. "You gonna run, or you gonna give us a show? I bet you've never even seen a real fight, let alone been in one." The words stung, not because they were true, but because they echoed the taunts Aisha had heard years ago as Black Viper. "You don't belong in this ring," the crowds had shouted, their voices thick with the same disdain Brad now wielded like a weapon. She had silenced them then, her kicks slicing through their doubts, her victories undeniable. But the cost of that final victory, the image of Maria Torres collapsing, the ambulance lights flashing, still haunted her. She had buried that life, chosen the mop over the gloves. Yet Brad's provocation was dragging her back to the edge of a world she had sworn to leave behind. Aisha's voice when she spoke was low, but carried a weight that silenced the room. "I don't want to fight you," she said, her eyes locking onto Brad's. "But if you keep pushing, you'll regret it." The words were not a threat, but a promise, delivered with a calm that made Brad's smirk falter. He recovered quickly, laughing, a forced, brittle sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Regret it?" he mocked, stepping closer, his chest puffed out. "You hear that, folks? The janitor's gonna make me regret it." He turned to the students, expecting laughter, but the room remained silent, the air charged with anticipation. Brad's hand shot out, aiming to shove Aisha's shoulder, a gesture meant to humiliate, to assert his dominance. But Aisha moved, a subtle shift of her weight, her body flowing like water around a stone. His hand met empty air, and he stumbled slightly, caught off balance. The students gasped, a soft, collective sound that seemed to echo in the dojo's stillness. Brad's face reddened, his confidence cracking like a pane of glass. "Cute trick," he growled, stepping back to regain his composure. What, you watched some YouTube tutorials or something? Aisha didn't respond, but her stance had changed, her feet settling into a position that any trained fighter would recognize. Balanced, grounded, ready. Her shoulders relaxed, her arms loose but poised, a silent testament to years of muscle memory. Lynn's eyes widened, her fingers tightening around her phone. She had seen enough fights to know that Aisha's posture wasn't random. It was the mark of someone who had danced in the ring, someone who knew the rhythm of combat. Marcus leaned forward, his brow furrowing, as if trying to place where he had seen such a stance before. Brad, oblivious to the shift, pressed on. "All right, janitor girl," he said, his voice rising with a mix of irritation and bravado. "You want to play? Let's make it official. Step onto this mat, and I'll show you what happens when you step out of your place." The words hung heavy, their prejudice no longer veiled, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Lynn's voice broke the silence, sharper now. "Coach, stop it! This is wrong!" Her words were a spark, igniting a flicker of courage in the others. Tara nodded slightly, her arms crossed, while Jake shifted uncomfortably, his loyalty to Brad wavering. Aisha's gaze never left Brad's, her eyes dark pools of resolve. "You want a show?" she said, her voice steady, cutting through his bluster like a blade. "Fine, but when we're done, you'll apologize. To Lynn, to your students, and to this dojo for turning it into your stage." The challenge was quiet but unyielding, a line drawn in the sand. Brad's laugh was nervous now, his confidence eroding under the weight of her certainty. He turned to the students, gesturing grandly. "You see this? She thinks she's got something to prove. Let's give her what she wants." The dojo was no longer just a training ground. It had become a crucible, where egos and secrets were about to collide. Aisha Carter, the silent janitor, stood at the center, her past clawing its way to the surface, ready to rewrite the story Brad thought he controlled. The Atlanta dojo was a cauldron of tension, the air so thick it seemed to hum with the weight of impending reckoning. Aisha Carter stood at the center of the tatami, her radiant brown skin catching the fluorescent glow, her long wavy black hair swaying slightly as she adjusted her stance. Gone was the janitor's deference. In its place was a quiet, coiled intensity that made the polished floor beneath her seem like a battlefield. Across from her, Brad Callahan, the self-styled Muay Thai king, squared his shoulders, his muscular frame taut with a mix of bravado and unease. His blue eyes flickered with defiance, but a shadow of doubt lingered, betraying the crack in his arrogance. The 5 students, Lin Nguyen, Marcus, Jake, Tara, and Sam, formed a loose semicircle around the mat, their breaths shallow, their eyes wide with anticipation. The dojo, once a place of routine, had transformed into a stage where truths were about to be laid bare. Brad's voice broke the silence, sharp but unsteady. "All right, janitor girl," he sneered, bouncing lightly on his toes, his fists raised in a classic Muay Thai guard. "You wanted a show? Let's give these kids a lesson in what happens when you step out of line." His words carried the same venomous prejudice, but they lacked the confidence of before, his earlier shove having met nothing but air. Aisha's calm defiance, her promise of an apology, had rattled him, and the students sensed it. Lynn clutched her phone, her knuckles pale, her eyes darting between Aisha and Brad, as if she could feel the storm brewing. Marcus leaned forward, his brow furrowed, while Tara crossed her arms, her expression a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Aisha's response was measured, her voice low but resonant, cutting through the dojo like a blade. "This isn't about me proving anything," she said, her dark eyes locked on Brad's. "It's about you learning what this place is supposed to stand for." She shifted her weight, her feet settling into a stance so fluid it seemed effortless, knees slightly bent, shoulders relaxed, hands loose but ready. It was the posture of a fighter, not a janitor, and the sight sent a ripple of unease through the room. Brad's smirk faltered, his gaze flickering to her stance, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Big talk," he scoffed, stepping forward. "Let's see if you can back it up." The memory of another ring flooded Aisha's mind. A Chicago arena 7 years ago, the crowd's racist taunts echoing in her ears. "You don't belong here." She had been Black Viper then, a kickboxing prodigy whose speed and precision had silenced doubters. But that night, her final fight, the pressure of those jeers had pushed her too far. Her kicks had landed too hard, sending Maria Torres to the hospital, leaving Aisha with a guilt that had driven her from the sport. Now, as Brad circled her, his taunts eerily familiar, she felt the past clawing at her, urging her to fight. But this time she vowed it would be different. She wouldn't lose control. Brad lunged, his first attack, a textbook Muay Thai jab, fast and precise, aimed at Aisha's chest. The students gasped, but Aisha was already gone, her body swaying to the side like a shadow slipping through light. The jab sliced through empty air, and Brad stumbled slightly, his balance compromised. "Lucky dodge," he muttered, his face reddening as he reset his stance. He followed with a low kick, his shin arcing toward Aisha's leg, but she lifted her foot just enough, letting the kick pass harmlessly beneath her. Her movements were economical, almost casual, yet they carried a grace that made the students lean closer, their eyes wide with awe. "Too slow," Aisha said softly, her voice steady, almost instructional. "Your weight's too far forward. It throws off your balance." The critique was clinical, delivered without malice, but it stung Brad like a slap. His eyes narrowed, and he unleashed a flurry of strikes. Jab, cross, another low kick. Each one faster, more desperate. Aisha moved like water, her body flowing around his attacks, her feet gliding across the tatami. A jab missed her cheek by inches. A cross sailed over her shoulder as she dipped. The kick found only air as she stepped back with infuriating ease. The students were transfixed, their earlier discomfort replaced by fascination. Lynn's phone was out now, recording discreetly, her hands trembling with excitement. Brad's breaths grew ragged, his frustration mounting. "Stop dancing!" he barked, his voice cracking with irritation. He lunged again, this time with a powerful elbow strike, a move he had used to dominate sparring partners. Aisha tilted her head, letting the elbow graze past her ear, her eyes never leaving his. "Your elbow's telegraphed," she said, her tone calm but piercing. "Your shoulder twitches before you throw it." The students murmured, Jake whispering to Tara, "Did you see that? She's reading him like a book." The dojo was no longer Brad's kingdom. It was Aisha's stage, and she commanded it without raising her voice or her fists. Brad, sensing his control slipping, doubled down. "You think you're smart?" he growled, his face flushed with anger. He launched a combination, a jab, a knee strike, a high kick. Each move textbook perfect but laced with desperation. Aisha countered effortlessly, stepping outside his jab, sidestepping the knee, and ducking under the kick with a precision that bordered on artistry. The students were silent now, their breaths held as if witnessing something sacred. Aisha's heart pounded, not with fear but with the thrill of a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. The ring, the movement, the dance of combat. It was all coming back, but she refused to let it consume her. She saw Maria's face in her mind, the guilt that had chained her for 7 years, and she grounded herself. This wasn't about winning, it was about teaching. "Last chance, Brad," she said, her voice cutting through his panting breaths. "Apologize now, or this gets real." Brad's laugh was hollow, his confidence crumbling. "Apologize?" he spat, stepping forward. "To you? You're nothing." But his words lacked conviction, and the students saw it. Lynn's eyes gleamed with something like hope, her phone still recording, capturing the moment when a janitor became something more. Aisha stood still, her stance unwavering, her presence filling the dojo with a quiet power that made Brad's bluster seem small. The showdown had begun, and the outcome was already shifting, not with fists, but with the weight of a truth yet to be revealed. The Atlanta dojo was a crucible of silence, the air charged with the weight of a moment teetering on the edge of revelation. Aisha Carter stood at the heart of the tatami, her radiant brown skin glistening under the fluorescent lights, her long, wavy black hair framing a face that held no trace of fear. Her stance was effortless, feet grounded, shoulders relaxed, hands poised like a dancer awaiting her cue. Across from her, Brad Callahan's chest heaved, his blonde buzz cut damp with sweat, his blue eyes wild with a mix of fury and confusion. His Muay Thai guard, once a symbol of dominance, now seemed fragile, his attacks having met nothing but air. The five students, Lynn Nguyen, Marcus, Jake, Tara, and Sam, stood rooted, their eyes locked on Aisha, sensing that the janitor they had overlooked was about to redefine the room. Brad's voice cracked through the tension, hoarse with frustration. "What's wrong with you?" he snarled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Stop dodging and fight, or get out of my dojo." His words, laced with the same prejudice that had sparked this confrontation, rang hollow now, his authority eroding with each missed strike. Isha's calm was unnerving, her dark eyes steady as she replied, "I told you, Brad, this isn't about fighting, it's about respect." Her voice was soft but carried a weight that silenced the room, a quiet command that made the students lean closer, their breaths shallow. Lynn, clutching her phone, had been recording discreetly, her hands trembling with excitement. She had seen something in Aisha's movements, the fluid grace, the precise dodges, that reminded her of old fight videos she'd watched for her martial arts obsession. Her fingers flew across her phone, searching for a name she couldn't quite place. Marcus, beside her, whispered, "She's not just a janitor, is she?" Lynn shook her head, her eyes glued to her screen as search results loaded, her heart racing with anticipation. Brad, oblivious to the shift, lunged again, his desperation palpable. He threw a vicious combination, a jab, a cross, a spinning elbow, each move fueled by anger, each one meant to prove his superiority. The students gasped, but Aisha moved like a phantom, her body swaying just enough to let the jab miss her cheek, dipping under the cross and stepping back as the elbow sliced through empty air. The dojo seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by Brad's labored panting. "You're nothing," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Just a cleaner playing pretend." Aisha's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with purpose. She saw the Chicago arena in her mind's eye. 7 years ago, the crowd's racist jeers, "You don't belong," echoing as she, Black Viper, dominated the ring. She remembered the final fight, the moment her kick had landed too hard, sending Maria Torres to the hospital. The guilt had driven her from kickboxing, from the life of a three-time national champion, into the shadows of this janitor's life. But Brad's taunts, his arrogance, had awakened something she had buried, a fire that burned not for vengeance, but for justice. She decided it was time. As Brad reset his stance, his face red with exertion, Aisha moved. It wasn't an attack, not yet, but a single, deliberate step forward, her body shifting into a kickboxing stance so perfect it seemed carved from memory. Her left foot slid forward, her right hand raised just enough to guard her chin, her body angled to minimize exposure. The students noticed their murmurs rippling through the room. Tara's eyes widened, and Jake muttered, "That's not a beginner's stance." Brad launched another attack, a low kick aimed at Aisha's thigh, but she countered with a subtle lift of her leg, letting his shin glance off harmlessly. Then, in a moment that seemed to defy time, she responded. Her right hand shot out, not in a punch but a precise push, her palm connecting with Brad's chest. The motion was almost gentle, a controlled application of force, yet it sent Brad staggering back, his feet scrambling to find balance. He didn't fall, but the impact rocked him, his eyes wide with shock as he clutched his chest, gasping. The dojo erupted in stunned silence. Lynn's phone nearly slipped from her hands as she stared at her screen, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh my God," she said, her eyes darting to Aisha. "It's her! Black Viper!" She turned her phone toward Marcus, showing a grainy photo of a younger Aisha in a kickboxing ring, her gloves raised in victory. "Aisha Carter," Lynn read aloud, her voice trembling with awe. "Three-time national kickboxing champion, undefeated, retired after an accident." The words hit the room like a thunderclap, the students turning to Aisha, their faces a mix of disbelief and reverence. Brad froze, his breath ragged, his confidence shattered. "What?" he stammered, his eyes darting from Lynn to Aisha. That's not possible." Aisha's gaze met his, calm but unyielding, and for the first time fear flickered in his eyes. "It's true," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of her past. "I was Black Viper. I walked away from fighting because I hurt someone I didn't mean to. But I never forgot what the ring taught me. Respect, discipline, control, things you've forgotten. The students were transfixed, their earlier unease replaced by awe. Sam, the quiet teen, whispered to Jake, "She's a legend." Tara nodded, her arms uncrossing, her skepticism gone. Lynn's phone was still recording, capturing the moment when a janitor became a myth. Aisha stepped back, her stance relaxing, but her presence filled the dojo like a tide. "This isn't about me," she said, her eyes sweeping over the students, lingering on Lynn's grateful gaze. "It's about what this place should be. A sanctuary, not a stage for your ego, Brad." Brad's face paled, the reality sinking in. He had challenged a champion, humiliated her for sport, and now stood exposed before his students. His mouth opened, but no words came, his arrogance dissolving in the face of Aisha's truth. The dojo was no longer his. It belonged to the woman who had turned his taunts into a lesson, not with fists, but with the quiet power of her past. The air crackled with the weight of her revelation, and the students knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment that would change the dojo forever. The Atlanta dojo was a frozen tableau, the air thick with the aftershock of Aisha Carter's revelation. Her radiant brown skin glowed under the harsh fluorescent lights, her long, wavy black hair framing a face that radiated quiet authority. The tatami beneath her feet, once Brad Callahan's domain, now bore the weight of her presence, a presence that had shifted the room's gravity. Brad stood opposite her, his muscular frame sagging, his blonde buzz cut damp with sweat, his blue eyes hollow with the dawning realization of his mistake. The students, Lin Ningyan, Marcus, Jake, Tara, and Sam, stood in a loose semicircle, their eyes wide, their breaths caught in a collective pause. Lynn's phone, still recording, trembled in her hands, capturing the moment when a janitor had become a legend, and an instructor's arrogance had crumbled. Brad's voice, when it finally came, was a ragged whisper. I didn't know," he stammered, his hands dropping from their defensive stance, his face pale with the sting of humiliation. The man who had mocked Aisha as janitor girl now faced the truth. She was Black Viper, a three-time national kickboxing champion, a name etched in the annals of martial arts history. Aisha's gaze held his, steady and unflinching, but there was no triumph in her eyes, only a calm resolve, tempered by the weight of her past. "Knowing shouldn't matter," she said, her voice low but piercing, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You didn't mock me because I was a janitor. You mocked me because you thought I was less." The words landed like a blow, and Brad flinched, his shoulders hunching as if to shield himself from their truth. The students watched, their earlier unease now a quiet reverence. Lynn stepped forward, her ponytail swaying, her voice firm despite the tremor in it. "Coach Brad," she said, her eyes blazing with a courage she hadn't shown before, "what you did wasn't teaching. It was bullying, and it was wrong." Her words echoed Aisha's, a spark of defiance that lit the room. Marcus nodded, his fists unclenching, while Tara's arms dropped to her sides, her skepticism replaced by a quiet respect. Jake and Sam exchanged glances, their loyalty to Brad unraveling in the face of Aisha's undeniable presence. Brad's face reddened, a mix of shame and defiance warring across his features. "You think you can lecture me?" he snapped, but his voice lacked conviction, a hollow echo of his earlier bravado. He turned to the students, seeking support, but found none. The dojo, once his kingdom, had turned against him, its allegiance shifting to the woman who had exposed his flaws without throwing a single punch. Aisha stepped forward, her movements fluid, her presence commanding the room. "This isn't about lectures," she said. "It's about accountability. You turned this dojo into a stage for your ego, Brad. You owe Lynn an apology for silencing her. You owe your students for betraying what martial arts stand for. And you owe yourself for becoming someone who needs to put others down to feel strong." The students murmured, their agreement a soft ripple that filled the room. Lynn's eyes shone with gratitude, her phone still capturing every word. Aisha's words weren't just a rebuke, they were a call to something higher, a reminder of the principles that had drawn them all to this dojo: discipline, respect, humility. Brad's gaze dropped to the floor, his hands clenching and unclenching, as if grappling with the weight of his actions. The memory of his taunts, "You think you belong here?" echoed in his mind, now laced with the bitter taste of his own ignorance. Aisha's mind flickered back to her own past, to the Chicago arena where she had stood as Black Viper, her victories marred by racist jeers and the guilt of Maria Torres's injury. She had walked away from that life, convinced her strength was a curse, but tonight, standing before Brad, she felt a shift. This wasn't about reclaiming glory, it was about reclaiming her voice, her right to be seen as more than a janitor, more than a target for prejudice. She saw Maria's face in her mind, the guilt that had chained her for 7 years. But she also saw Lynn's courage, the students' growing respect, and she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Brad's voice broke the silence, barely audible. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his eyes still fixed on the floor. "To you, Aisha, to Lynn, to all of you." The apology was raw, forced by the weight of his defeat, but it was a start. Aisha nodded, her expression softening but resolute. "Words are easy, Brad," she said. "What matters is what you do next. This dojo deserves better than what you gave it tonight." Her words were not cruel but firm, a challenge to rise above the man he had been. Lynn lowered her phone, her eyes meeting Aisha's with a mix of awe and gratitude. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "But thank you." Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady. "Yeah, thank you. I've been training here for a year, and I've never seen anything like that." Tara and Jake nodded, their earlier hesitation gone, while Sam, the quiet teen, simply stared at Aisha, as if seeing her for the first time. The dojo was transformed, its air no longer heavy with tension, but alive with possibility. Aisha stepped back, her stance relaxing, but her presence lingered, a quiet force that had reshaped the room. Brad stood alone, his authority stripped away, his arrogance replaced by a painful awareness of his flaws. The students looked to Aisha, not as a janitor, but as a beacon of what martial arts could be. Lynn's recording, still running, captured the moment when a single push had toppled an ego and revealed a truth. Strength wasn't in belts or titles, but in the courage to stand for what was right. As the students began to murmur among themselves, discussing what they had witnessed, Aisha felt a weight lift. She had broken her vow not to fight, but she hadn't lost control. She had honored Maria's memory by choosing restraint, by teaching rather than destroying. The dojo, once a stage for Brad's cruelty, was now a space where a new lesson had taken root, one that would echo far beyond this night. 3 months had passed since the night Aisha Carter turned the Atlanta dojo from a stage of arrogance into a crucible of truth. The air in Elite Strike Muay Thai Academy felt different now, lighter, alive with purpose. The fluorescent lights still buzzed, casting their stark glow over the polished tatami, but the space was no longer Brad Callahan's kingdom. Aisha, her radiant brown skin catching the evening light, her long, wavy black hair pulled into a neat bun, stood at the front of the room, no longer a janitor but a revered instructor. Her navy uniform had been replaced by a sleek martial arts GI, its crisp white fabric a symbol of her reclaimed identity. The dojo hummed with the energy of a new class, a mix of familiar faces and eager newcomers. All drawn by whispers of the night, a legend had emerged from the shadows. The students, Lynn Nguyen, Marcus, Jake, Tara, Sam, and a dozen others, stood in neat rows, their stances crisp as Aisha led them through a series of kickboxing drills. Her voice, calm but commanding, carried the weight of experience. "Keep your guard tight," she instructed, her dark eyes scanning the group. "It's not just about hitting hard, it's about moving smart." Lynn, her ponytail swaying, mirrored Aisha's movements with fierce precision, a spark of pride in her eyes. Marcus, once hesitant, now threw kicks with confidence, while Tara and Jake exchanged nods, their respect for Aisha unspoken but clear. Sam, the quiet teen, watched her every move, absorbing her lessons like a sponge.